GM, good morning. Welcome to the Milk Road Show, the daily crypto show where our crypto news hits like a perfectly timed high five with no awkward misses. I'm your host, Jay Hamilton, and today we are joined by Matt Hougan, CIO of Bitwise, a leading crypto fund. Their Bitcoin ETF has crossed 4 billion in assets under management in less than a year since launching. In today's episode, Matt is going to walk us through his 6 predictions for 2025, including his predictions on price targets for the majors, Bitcoin, ETH, and SOL. We're also going to talk about what Matt expects from the Bitcoin ETF and from the ETH ETF. And we're going to talk about some major political and regulatory decisions that Matt expects to come in 2025 and what those would mean for your bags. Now, before we jump in, I don't know if you guys are subscribed to the Milk Road newsletter, but if you're not, you're going to want to make sure you subscribe. It's 5 minutes in your inbox every day to give you the down low to stay up to date on crypto, which, as you guys know, is so freaking hard. It moves so fast. So make sure you subscribe. Hit the link in the show notes if you're not already subscribed. Before we jump into today's episode and hear from Matt, we need to take a minute to hear from our sponsors. Meanwhile is the world's first licensed and regulated life insurance company built for the Bitcoin economy. They do everything in BTC. You pay in BTC, they pay claims to your family in BTC. You take out policy loans entirely in BTC when you need liquidity. Protect your family from life's uncertainty and a broken financial system. Build intergenerational Bitcoin wealth while the cost of living skyrockets in dollar terms. Plus, get all the tax and legal benefits of life insurance now in Bitcoin. Visit milkroad.com/meanwhile to join the waitlist and get early access to the world's first Bitcoin life insurance. Matt, welcome back to the Milk Road Show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Okay, I got to start with, you put out a tweet the other day, and I just want to read this because I thought it was such a great tweet, and I want you to comment on it before we jump into your predictions. You said 95% of the world's largest investors have zero exposure to Bitcoin, but 95% of all Bitcoin is already owned.
That's the thing, right? That's the thing about this space. I'd spent the past week sort of re-underwriting my thesis on this space because everyone I talked to was so bullish. And when I hear everyone being bullish, I like to try to poke holes at my underlying assumptions. And I kept coming back to some of these fundamental numbers. I like this one because it's symmetrical, but I think it's approximately true. And that 95% is going to have to get allocated to crypto. They're going to have to. They're going to have to convince the 95% of the Bitcoin that's already owned to shake loose some Bitcoin or shake loose some crypto. And it's pretty exciting. So that's where that tweet came from re-underwriting the space and coming out the other side even more bullish than I was before.
So I was just going to ask, is that how you came out? Because I have the same feeling right now where I keep checking myself, and same with our team. It's like, can we be this bullish? Are we missing something?
Yes. Yeah, I did come out more bullish. I think it's really important to do that. I mean, I went back, I looked at, in Bitcoin specifically, how much Bitcoin are ETFs going to buy? How much are corporations going to buy? How much are governments going to buy? Where is the sale process going to come from? And in broader crypto, is the growth of throughput real? Are there really interesting real world games and applications being built? And I just kept coming up with yes. So yeah, I exited even more bullish. I loved 2024. What an incredible year. But I think 2025 may actually be even more exciting.
That's what we like to hear. Okay, let's start with, what's your first prediction for 2025?
Yeah, my first prediction is that the Magnificent Three, Bitcoin, ETH, and Solana, are each going to make all-time highs in 2025. I think Coinbase equity will as well, to bring in our TradFi allocation to crypto. I think Bitcoin, ETH, and Solana are all going up and going up substantially. I know before this, you asked me if I would do price targets. I'm willing to do price targets.
Okay.
At the start of last year, Bitcoin was at 40. We said it was going to go to 80. Now we're in the 90s when we record this. I think Bitcoin will end the year at 200,000. I think it's going to double again next year. And I think if we get a US government strategic reserve that actually buys or is on pace to buy $1 million Bitcoin, then I think that too could be 4 or 5. I think it could be really substantial.
What do you think the probability of the US Reserve happening in 2025 is?
I think the probability of the US not selling the 200,000 Bitcoin it has is very high,
Mhm.
80, 90%. I think the probability of it agreeing to acquire another million is probably something like a third or a quarter, which is not zero,
That's
right?
not
It's
zero.
not zero. It's not zero at all. But the reason our forecast is 200K is because that assumes that that doesn't happen, right? So certainly the last few weeks have taught us a lot of crazy stuff can happen. I think it's 25% or 30% chance is pretty good considering you're talking about something that will ultimately drive Bitcoin's price to $1 million or more.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's the most likely scenario.
Right, and let's be clear, you're not saying that it wouldn't happen in 2026. We're just asking that would it happen next year, which to me feels it would require a lot of things to go right and exactly as they would need to go from just the political process for everyone to agree that that's what they're going to do.
That is exactly right. And it would require a lot of prioritization
Mhm.
on the political side and then not a lot of pushback. You're just asking for a lot. So, eventually, do I think it's going to get there? Do I think we're going to get widespread government adoption of Bitcoin across multiple governments? I absolutely do. I just don't want to put my stake in the ground and say it's going to be the next 12 months. I think it could very well happen,
Okay.
but probably the base case is it doesn't.
Okay, let's go from Bitcoin, everybody's favorite token of the day, to Ethereum, the token that just seems to continue to have a tough go. What are your thoughts on Ethereum for next year?
Yeah, I think it's going to set new all-time high as well. I think it'll pip over its previous and get to something like 5K. I think there are two catalysts for it. The reason I think ETH will stop being the forgotten asset.
Mhm.
The first is, I've spent a lot of time on the past few days digging into the layer 2 space and particularly into the sort of the Starknet validity proof side of that spectrum, and it's getting really fast and really efficient. So I really do think we're solving ETH's throughput challenge. And then on the flip side, one of my core beliefs for next year is we're going to see Wall Street come into crypto in a major way through stable coins, through tokenization projects. The most of that's going to come into ETH. So you have improving technology, and then you have a series of headlines: ETH, 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 ETH and Goldman Sachs, ETH and JP Morgan, ETH and UBS. And I think that's going to be enough to get it out of the doldrums, right? Will it outperform other sort of altcoins, if you want to call them that? I'm not sure. But can it get back to new all-time highs? I think absolutely.
Right, right. But when you think about it, like 5,000, just getting to all-time highs is pretty bearish for ETH when we're going into a year where it feels like all the stars are aligning. That if Bitcoin's going to double, you would hope that your altcoins go up even more than that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the challenge ETH has is it's moved into sort of this fundamental space where it's driven, it's sort of made the transition from being driven by memes and headlines to being driven by fundamental activity. And that's a complex space where you have this challenge of L2 fee compression and burn, right? And once you sort of seen tech companies go through this when they go from pre-revenue to post-revenue, and there's this awkward teenage moment where they're like, if you value them on fundamentals, it doesn't quite add up, but they're not really meme driven. And I think that's where ETH is. I think those fundamentals start to really ramp in 2026 when the projects we're seeing built really start gaining traction. So yeah, 5,000, you can call me bearish, but it is a new all-time high and there probably is upside. But I think that's the challenge it's going to face
Hmm,
next year.
very interesting. Okay, let's go to the last one, Solana.
Yeah, Sol, we debate this internally. Look, I think it's going to have a great year. I think it's probably going to outperform ETH. I think 750 could be easy. You could see it get to 1,000. That's certainly not within the realm of craziness. I think the catalyst for Sol that we're monitoring is it's established this dominant position in sort of the crypto community space, and particularly with meme coins and sort of fun items. I think it's going to add to that more serious projects moving on to a more established Solana ecosystem. We've seen that in the past with things like Render, but I think you're going to see it in an accelerating basis. And if you get sort of dual thrusts like the fun casino part of crypto or the community part of crypto and the more institutional part of crypto, that's a pretty good narrative to lift it, up to double or triple in the year ahead.
When you talk to, because you always have such an interesting take on what a lot of the financial advisors and a lot of those that can have control of institutional money see, when you talk to them, are they interested in, I mean, obviously I understand they're interested in Bitcoin. Are they interested in a Solana versus Ethereum? Do they tend to have one that they ask more about than another?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you asked that. I assumed that they would be interested in ETH because it does have this fundamental building block. We get a lot of questions that skip straight to Solana. I
Really?
think there's an aspect of the institutional investor who crosses the chasm into crypto, into Bitcoin, and then wants to be kind of cool. And it's not that cool to be Bitcoin and ETH. It's like,
Mm.
oh, let's go to what's next. Oh, this Solana thing, Phoenix out of the ashes of FTX. But, so we actually do get a fair number of questions about Solana. And I find that surprising, but it is a very real thing.
When you look more long term, I'm starting to develop this thesis that, and I think a lot of people have been feeling this for a while, that ETH just might not get the pump that a lot of other tokens are going to get in this cycle, and a lot of that is narrative based, for better or for worse. But do you think that long term, do you still believe in ETH? Because my thesis is that maybe it skips ETH, but that ETH still has all these fundamentals, and that in the maybe it's the next cycle that ETH will have its moment. It's just might get skipped this cycle.
I think that's a reasonable thesis. Look, I mean, ETH is really very close to having solved the blockchain trilemma. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, the challenge is just the difficulty of moving across the layer two ecosystem. But that's been a goal for public blockchains for years, and it's actually pretty close. And particularly as sort of the validity proofs mature in the space, I think it's going to do just fine long term. But I agree, it could miss this cycle. It's still substantially bigger than all the other programmable L1s put together,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think people think of like ETH and Solana being similar, but actually the relationship is a lot like Bitcoin to ETH, right? These are like nesting Russian dolls that get small really quick. And so you could see Solana pump, you could see Aptos pump, you could see Sui pump, you could see lots of these grow substantially in size and still not quite equal ETH. And I think that's probably what you're going to see. And long term, I agree. I think it's going to come out the other side as one of the major public blockchains that we talk about for the next 30 years. I don't think it's going to be missed or lose out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's go to your second prediction for 2025.
Sure. Yeah. Second prediction is that Bitcoin ETFs will attract more inflows in 2025 than they did in 2024. Obviously,
Wow.
yeah, I feel really strongly about this one. So I think there's such a success, Bitcoin ETFs, right? They've pulled in, we don't know the full numbers, but call it $30+ billion, the most ever of any ETF. And I think there's this assumption that there is this pent up demand and it's now been taken care of. And now we're going to see like a few $1 billion. But there's no reason to assume this is true. Let me give you the counterfactuals. The first is that in ETF land, year one is always the slowest. If you look at any ETF, it grows the most in year one, or it goes a little bit in year one, and year two, three, four, five, and six grows substantially beyond that. That's what happened with gold, what's happened with almost every ETF ever. So that's a big piece of it. The second counterfactual is that the Bitcoin ETFs aren't even approved on the largest wealth management platforms. They have partial approval on Morgan Stanley. They're not yet approved on Wells Fargo or UBS or others. There's trillions of dollars that can't even buy them yet. And then the third is that, look, institutions just move slow. So far, many of the adopters of crypto ETPs have been retail. And I think institutions are starting to come on board. And I think they're going to accelerate substantially in 2025. So, yeah, we think $30 billion is a down payment. We think it may be more like 40, 50 in the year to
Mm.
come.
Wow. Okay. So good things ahead for the Bitcoin ETF. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody based upon what you laid out, and also its success so far. I got to touch on the ETH ETF though, because the last time we had you on the show was all about the ETH ETF, and sorry to say, your predictions were not right, but that's okay. We're not always right here. None of us have a crystal ball. We certainly are not accurate with, and I'll be admitting the things I got wrong with my predictions as well this year. But what happened? Why was ETH ETF been such a, why has it been so flat? Why has it not succeeded the way the Bitcoin ETF has?
Yeah, such a dog. I mean, I think there are two things that I underestimated in expecting the success of the product. The first was I underestimated the outflows from ETH.
Mm.
So, the people look at the net flows, and we're now in positive net flows, but for a while we were in negative net flows. But they forget that ETH bled, $3.5 billion in assets.
Mhm.
And that's a lot to overcome. And I thought because ETH's discount had narrowed long before the ETF launched, that much of the arbitrage activity was already out of the space. And that turned out to be wrong, right? So you had this flood of assets on the downside that reduces the number. If we were here and they were like 3 or 4 billion, it'd be the second most successful ETF launch of all time. And we'd be talking about it as a success. And then the second one is I thought ETH was going to catch a bid, right? This has been a atypical sort of crypto cycle where Bitcoin has accelerated its dominance, and what non-Bitcoin activity there has skipped a generation and hit SOL on down. And when you put those two things together, you get the result that we had. Long term, I'm still bullish. We're excited about our ETF. It's a few $100 million in the scheme of most ETFs. That would be a massively successful launch. But yeah, it's been much slower than I think most ETF experts sort of anticipated.
Mm-hmm. You recently filed for a Solana ETF. Do you think that that gets approved in 2025? And when, and what are your expectations around that?
Yeah, my legal counsel says I can't comment on our specific filing, but I will say, I think we've even before the election, you and I had the conversation. I think we've entered the ETF era of crypto. We're going to get ETFs or ETPs on a wide variety of assets. You have to assume that the election accelerated that dramatically. We're going to get new leadership at the SEC. They're going to be more accommodative. It's impossible to forecast, but we wouldn't have filed if we didn't think we could win approval, right? It takes money and time and effort. So you can read through that we're excited about it. And I think there'll be substantial demand. Like we discussed, people ask us about Solana all the time. It's got a very strong thesis and strong resonance out there in the investor community.
Explain something to me. So I believe VanEck was the first to file for the Solana ETF, and there is a deadline in January or February for their ETF. Does that impact that it has to be approved or not approved at that point? Is that deadline, is there any date like that in the calendar that we should all be watching?
Yeah. So the way these I don't remember exactly what happened with the VanEck filing, if they pulled it and then refiled. So I'm
Or
not
maybe
sure.
they did pull it. You might be right.
I think they may have pulled it, and I think they probably refiled. I'm not sure. People will have to check. But yeah, there's a calendar process that stretches up to 240 days from the time the 19B4 is filed. So the filing you referred to with Bitwise and others, a few days ago, at the time we're recording this, you can count forward 240 days. The SEC has to decide by then. I would note that that's the most time they can take.
Hmm.
They have checkpoints in between. They can decide earlier. And I think that ends up in something like August, if I remember where it counts. So August or before, we'll know yes or no.
Okay. Okay, great. Let's go to your third prediction for 2025.
All right. I feel like I'm the only person in crypto talking about this. The Department of Labor will relax rules allowing crypto into 401k plans, paving the way for significant flows. Everyone with this new administration coming in has their pet project that they want to see a regulatory 180 on. Maybe it's market structure, maybe it's stable coins, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. For me, it's this obscure note that the Department of Labor put out in 2022 warning 401k plans to not allow crypto into their investment portfolios or they would face audit. I think the word they used was extreme caution. I've never seen anything like it. Why does it matter? It matters because there's something like $8 trillion in 401k plans, which can't currently access crypto. And additionally, every month, millions of Americans save money into their 401k plans. I would love a portion of that to come into the crypto market. I would love it because I believe in crypto's ability to improve the long-term returns of diversified portfolios. And I would love it because it would give a persistent bid to these assets and actually contribute to reducing the volatility of the space. So, will it happen? I don't know, but I would love to see it happen, and I think it might. And I think if it does, I actually think it's a pretty big deal for crypto.
No kidding. If there's $8 trillion in 401ks, any estimates on your end and models that you've done on what, if let's say this did move forward, what percentage could we expect, 1% or 3% to go to Bitcoin or to go to
Yeah.
crypto in general?
Yes. I mean, the base case that I use in this is I look in Canada where Fidelity has asset allocation ETFs, and they range between 1% and 3% crypto. That doesn't seem crazy, right? What if 1% to 3% crypto becomes the standard in 529 plans, which are the college savings account, in 401k plans, which are the retirement accounts? That's probably more important than institutions deciding onesie twosies whether each one will invest, right? Let's solve this bulk problem. I think it's a big deal. For what it's worth noting, crypto is also exciting in a retirement context because it's a tax protected context, right? And if you're looking at an asset with strong appreciation potential, you want that in a tax deferred setting. So I think this could be a very big unlock if it happens. Maybe it's a long shot. I don't hear other people talking about it, but I'm trying to will it into the world and into the conversation.
I'm with you. Let's manifest it, Matt. Okay, let's go to your fourth prediction for 2025.
Yeah, this one's more broadly held by people. I think stablecoin assets could double, which would put them above 350 billion. I think there are two primary drivers of this. The one everyone talks about is that we're likely to see stablecoin legislation that allows them to exist in a regulated format in the new Congress. And that will obviously be a dramatic spur to adoption. We're also seeing growth in payments, both globally and domestically. But the other thing I think people overlook is just, stablecoin assets rise when you're in a bull market. That's just always been true. So I think there's a natural bullish push behind stablecoins and then an accelerant from stablecoin legislation. Add them together, I think it's $350 billion by the end of the year.
Yeah, that's looking like a pretty good number for stablecoins, but really just the beginning still. It feels like stablecoins have got a long way to go, particularly when you consider every time we look at stablecoins, its main use case is still in a lot of the developing world where they're just trying to shield their money against the crazy inflation that they might deal with in Argentina or in Turkey. Like there still isn't a lot of the developed world is not using or interested in stable coins yet. Most of them still are trying to figure out what Bitcoin is. Do you guys think about stable coins long term? I'm curious, when you think more decades, what are your views?
Absolutely massive. Absolutely massive. I mean, they're an incredible killer app. They're a US bank account and a US financial quality ecosystem everywhere in the world at the push of a button, right? I mean, that is just amazing. And you can see the sort of early adopters doing it. You can look into countries with high inflation rates, see the stablecoin adoption there. You can look into regions with difficult B2B payment networks like sub-Saharan Africa, and you can see what Yellow Card is doing there, right? The proof is in the pudding. It's not speculative use. This is, end real world use. Yeah, it's a multi-trillion-dollar space if the regulators don't muck it up.
Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Okay, your next prediction for 2025.
Yeah, we think there'll be another mainstream crypto application that sort of crosses the chasm and gains more than 1 million monthly users. I personally think it's likely to be in the gaming space. I think you're seeing a lot of investment. You're seeing a lot of big names, right? I saw a headline just a few days ago about FIFA and Mythical Games launching FIFA Rivals. You see some first-person shooter stuff. blockchain has gone from dial up to broadband, and now we're starting to see developers build in that space. Games are often the first thing to break. So I think there'll be some blockchain based game that gets really massive, permanent adoption, not
Mhm.
just flash in the pan, play to earn adoption, but people using it as primarily a game.
Right.
Uh,
You answered my follow-up question there, which was going to be so much of what these games see early on when they do well is a result of its incentives, right? And so maintaining that is difficult. But you're thinking that this is the type of thing that's more, this could be long term, less this is farmers and incentive based.
yeah, no tickling cats. I'm talking about games that are actually fun, right? I mean, I do think blockchain and Web3 is just a fundamentally amazing utility for games, and I think it's been gated by performance, and that gate has fallen over the past few years. And so now that we have highly performant blockchains, layer one and layer two networks, it strikes me as inevitable that this space, which for what it's worth, people forget, is the largest media space, right? Like it's bigger than movies, bigger than TV. It's absolutely massive.
You mean gaming. You mean
Yeah,
gaming when
we
you
think
say
of
that, yeah.
gaming as like my 11-year-old wasting time, but it's actually this massive media market. I think it moves substantially in the blockchain direction this year.
Yeah. Which runs off of digital assets that
Right.
you earn or pay for within the game that currently you do not, the game owns that. You can't leave the game. You have no self cut. It's literally like it's the playbook for what we're trying to do here with crypto written perfectly for us. I think the other thing I see with gaming, and I'm hesitant to make a gaming projection because I've predicted that gaming was going to be every year for the past few years. I've made this prediction and I
Right.
keep being wrong. I keep waiting for it to happen because it just seems so obvious. But the thing that really stands out to me is we're also at the point where the tech is really abstracted because
Mhm.
most of these games, people don't want to know that they're using crypto. They don't even necessarily like the language around crypto. They have a stain about that. So I think we're now at a point where you can use these games and you won't even know it's on chain. You won't even know it's crypto. It'll just be a different way to own and buy and sell and trade assets, which you might favor because maybe there's lower fees, or maybe you make more, or maybe it's more liquid because there's a bigger marketplace that's offered to you that wasn't previously there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That abstraction had to happen in order
Mm-hmm.
to get the adoption. And I do think we're there. I think if people have played around with these things, they're pretty cool, they're pretty easy, they're pretty fun. And
Mm-hmm.
that's exciting.
Okay, Matt, final prediction for 2025.
Yeah, this ties back to that first prediction. It's that governments, corporations, and ETFs will purchase more than 1 million Bitcoin in 2025. We talked about looking at, why will Bitcoin go to 200,000? I talked about re-underwriting my thesis in the space. As I look at these three sort of drivers of massive Bitcoin demand, it's just hard to see how it doesn't happen. I mean, Michael Saylor bought 200,000 Bitcoin himself last year, and he plans to accelerate that in the new year. The reason I like this framing is that for people who are skeptical of this space, I try to point them at a few simple supply demand metrics. We know next year that the Bitcoin network will produce 160,000 Bitcoin. Do you think ETFs, which bought 400 plus thousand Bitcoin, will buy more or fewer next year? I think they'll buy more. Do you think corporations, which bought another three or 400,000 Bitcoin, will buy more or fewer next year? Well, not only is Saylor ramping up, but every day there's a new company that announces it's adding Bitcoin to its balance sheet. I think it's more. Do we think governments, which were sellers of Bitcoin last year, with the German government cashing out, the US threatening to, do we think they will be positive or negative? I think they'll be positive. And then you look at that, you get to 1 million Bitcoin on one side of the ledger and 160,000 on the other side. You say, where is the other 840,000 going to come from? And the answer is higher prices. And so I like it because it breaks down the source of demand. And I think it's hard to be bearish if you think about it that way.
Yeah, that's a great take. Let me ask you a couple other questions, which I did not give to you in our brief. So feel free to tell me that you don't want to
Let's
answer
do it.
these. But two questions that keep coming up on this show, and a lot of people are trying to wrap their heads around. One is this cycle going to be similar to past cycles where Bitcoin dominance would typically peak around this time? We're around 60%. I think we're slightly below 60% as of recording, but we might be different when this comes out. But around that, do you think that Bitcoin dominance comes down this cycle, or is this cycle different because of the ETF and because of maybe the US Reserve and all these other factors that maybe Bitcoin dominance actually continues at a high rate throughout the next year?
Oh, it's such a good question. I will say if there's a US strategic Bitcoin reserve buying a million Bitcoin, Bitcoin dominance will continue. That's just an overwhelming factor that will reverse that aspect. Absent that, I'm a big believer in human psychology. I think the driver of the sort of altcoin season is a classic wealth effect, which is crypto gets rich on Bitcoin and then has extra money and they look for other things. I don't think we've repealed human psychology, so I suspect that that will continue to happen. But again, if you have this as exogenous event of strategic Bitcoin reserve, the Bitcoin Act, then that's out the window.
Right. Okay. Great answer. And then my other question, we've been in these 4-year cycles since 2008. And our belief is that these cycles are driven by liquidity, not driven by the Bitcoin halving, even though some people might say that. The question, though, is, are these 4-year cycles going to continue? Or at some point, will we go back to the more typical business cycle, which doesn't follow a predictable 4-year pattern of rising and falling as it is right now? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned the particular business cycle, because I think the reason for the 4-year cycle is similar to what you said, but it's just the same reason there's a business cycle, which is you have a pullback and then there's a fundamental reason the thing recovers, and then eventually it gets over levered and that leverage get washed out of the system and you reset. Do I think we'll see the Bitcoin and crypto market get overhyped and too much leverage built into the system and have that washed out and reset? I do. So I don't think we've repealed the cycle. Will it be 4 years is a good question. I think that's incidental. I don't think there's so no, I have low confidence that it will be precisely 4 years. But do I think there'll be a 30+% pullback sometime in the next couple of years? Absolutely. A 50% plus pullback? Possibly. Right. So I think that will still happen. I do think it'll be diminished. I think it'll be diminished because there are many more actors in the crypto market. There's a lot of money that needs to come into this space, and we've sort of repealed the chance of it going to zero. So I think part of the reason it pulled back so far is that a lot of people were worried, well, maybe it'll go to zero. And so they didn't step in when the market pulled back. I think that's over. So I would say we'll still have a cycle. Whether it's 4 or 5 years, I don't know. And I think it'll be less pronounced than in the past. But, we haven't repealed bear markets.
Yeah.
We're going to get that.
And I want to be clear, when you say we could see a 30 to 50% pullback, you mean Bitcoin, right? You mean Bitcoin. Yeah. And that's an important note, because all the other tokens that you guys are holding on to, guys and gals, some of those are going to go 99.9% pullback, especially the meme coins. So watch yourselves. Don't get caught holding those bags.
Very, very, very good point. Very good point.
Matt, pleasure to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for joining us again. Wish you and your team a happy new year as you celebrate into 2025. And we'll look to get you back on at some point to review these predictions and see how we did.
Let's see how we do. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Awesome. Thanks for listening in, everybody. Have a wicked awesome day. As always, if you liked today's episode, please hit subscribe and make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on the next one. There's also a link in the description to our free 5-minute daily newsletter where we simplify crypto for you while making you laugh. And if you're willing to step up your crypto investing game, we're going to also leave a link for Milk Road Pro. You get access to our portfolio where you can see exactly what we we are buying. This is your number one resource to help you invest successfully in crypto. One final note, this show is for educational purposes only, and nothing we say is financial advice. Investing in crypto or any asset is risky, and you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. Thanks so much for listening in, my friends. Have a wicked awesome day.